Hi, everyone. Hello. Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for, for the Baylands webinar. My name's Aurora. I'm with Latino Outdoors here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And let us know if there are any Baylands near your area that you like to frequently visit. We're going to have plenty of time today to learn more about them. But in the meantime, if there are any that you visit or that you think are really cool, let us know in the chat. Let us know your name and where you're tuning in from. I'm with Latino Outdoors. Latino Outdoors is a community organization of national volunteers all across the United States. And our mission really is to inspire and connect and engage with Latino communities in the outdoors and really embrace our culture and our families and make sure that we're part of that outdoor narrative. Latino Outdoors has many different types of programs that happen all across the US. Our main program is our Vamos Outdoors, which really focuses on the outdoor engagement. So we do all sorts of outdoor activities with Midpen and beyond. We've done things like backpacking, camping, day hikes, nature journaling, or even just doing a scavenger hunt outside. Our other program that we do is our Crecemos Outdoors. Crecemos Outdoors is about fostering outdoor leadership, and that's within our community members or our network of volunteers. We also have a Yo Cuento program, which translates to I Matter or I Tell. And Yo Cuento is all about storytelling. Latino Outdoors started off as a blog back in 2013, and it still very much is at its core. So if you visit our website, you'll be able to read and hear about different community members' stories. And if you feel like you want to contribute to that blog, please feel free to do so. It's super important for us to uplift and share people's voices and people's stories. So I'm super excited to welcome you all today to this Baylands webinar in partnership with our longtime partners, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. We'll have a couple folks from their team jump on and share about the Baylands that are on their preserves, share about what's the importance of the Baylands, what kind of animals and wildlife really thrive in those areas, and what we can do as individuals or as a community to help protect these important spaces in our parks. So again, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in today on this, where I am, rainy Sunday. So this is kind of a perfect opportunity to still transport ourselves into the outdoors, even though we might not be able to go out there physically. So super appreciate you all being here with us today. So I'll pass it over to our partners over at Mid-Peninsula.
Thanks, Aurora. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Jolly. I'm a public affairs specialist here at Midpen. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Midpen, we are a special independent district, and our mission is to help plants, animals, and people thrive throughout the greater Santa Cruz mountain region. And we do that by preserving a connected greenbelt of over 70,000 acres of public open space land. And what's great about the 70,000 acres is that it encompasses completely different landscapes and diverse wildlife, including the baylands and wetlands that we're going to be talking about today, redwood forests, coastal grasslands. We're very fortunate to live in a biodiversity hotspot here in the Bay Area. And we're fortunate enough at Midpen to help keep those spaces thriving and available for public enjoyment 365 days a year. If you want to learn more about what Midpen does and some of our offerings, including our work with Latino Outdoors, you can just visit openspace.org. Our website can give you all kinds of information, including free experiences like this one. So I'm going to be introducing Karine Tolkatlian. She's one of our natural resources staff. She's a wildlife biologist. She's been working here in the Bay Area for 10 years and specializes mostly in shorebirds. So she's perfect for talking about the Baylands today. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Karine.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for spending your Sunday with us. I'm just going to get right to it because Aurora and Natalie did a wonderful job introducing a lot of the high-level content. So I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, wonderful. Okay, welcome to our chat about the wonderful world of Baylands. As Natalie said, my name is Corinne Tokatlian. I'm a resource management specialist at Midpen. My background is mostly with wildlife biology, but I've had the great pleasure of working in coastal and bayland ecosystems for about a decade now. So these are one of my favorite ecosystems and habitats, and I'm very happy to share them with you today. So I just want to start by kind of setting the stage with a few definitions because we kind of use these words interchangeably. Wetlands are a pretty broadly defined habitat type. The technical definition of a wetland is land that's saturated by either salt or fresh water for at least part of the year. And this condition produces a really unique ecosystem that's characterized by specific types of hydrology and soils and wildlife and vegetation. Wetlands can be a lot of different things. They can be marshes or mudflats. They can be estuaries or swamps. Some wetlands can be, freshwater lakes and high elevation forests, or they can be found along coasts and bays. Baylands are a specific type of wetland, and they're found along the shoreline of bays and are often made up of tidal marshes and tidal mudflat habitats. Here in California, we often see pickleweed-dominated marshes, like the one pictured here. This photo was taken in Alviso, if you're familiar with the South Bay area. So all of this green, all the green sections there are tidal marsh vegetation, predominantly comprised of pickleweed. And then the bare, dark areas are sections of mudflat where the sediment kind of accretes and grows, and then plants will eventually colonize and grow into an extensive carpet of that tidal marsh vegetation. And then all the swirly areas are just natural channels that transport the tide water through this system, and it feeds this system with sediments and nutrients as the water flows in and out. The San Francisco Bay is the largest estuary on the West Coast, and we're actually, like Natalie mentioned, in an internationally recognized biodiversity hotspot. And our bay wetlands are a significant part of why this area is so diverse and valuable. I think most of the folks probably listening in are from the South Bay or somewhere in the South Bay, and most of the content of the talk today is going to be about the South Bay, but just remember that this is a really complex estuarine system that extends much further north and east as well. Baylands are very biologically productive habitats, and you can see the historical extent of the San Francisco Baylands in green on this map here. They occur along that inner shoreline of the San Francisco Bay, and they're fed by daily fluctuations in tide water. So tide waters flow into the bay, the San Francisco Bay, kind of feed all of these wetland marshes, and then the tide recedes and the water leaves the bay. And this happens on a daily basis. So again, we have primarily tidal marshes and tidal mudflats with really dense systems of sloughs and channels. And all of those areas sort of sit at different elevations along the marsh plain. So areas in the low marsh are very regularly inundated with water, while areas up in the high marsh are only occasionally flooded. And you can see these two are sort of representative photos of a marsh at low tide versus a marsh at high tide. And as you can imagine, anything that lives within these bay wetlands has to be pretty well adapted to not only tolerate salt because of the marine tidal waters flowing in, but also has to be really tolerant of those changing water levels. So being able to live and survive in an area that is both completely dry and also completely saturated for several hours at a time. So baylands might not look like much at first glance, but there's actually a lot of complexity within these systems, and they provide a tremendous amount of ecosystem services. And I think the first thing we like to talk about, or I like to talk about with wetlands, is their ability to help us fight climate change. And they do this in a number of ways. The most notable way is by their ability to store carbon. And so plants, just in general, plants absorb carbon dioxide while they're growing, and then they release it when those plants decompose. Tidal salt marshes in particular are really biologically productive habitats. So they're able to actually capture a lot of carbon from the atmosphere, but they only release a small amount or a negligible amount of methane, which we know is a really powerful greenhouse gas. And this is partly because the decomposition that happens in marshes or in tidal wetlands is very slow, and it's slow in the wet mud of our baylands. So wetlands actually can trap carbon dioxide for hundreds or even thousands of years if this area is left undisturbed. And this is what we call blue carbon, and that's the sort of blue circles illustrated in this diagram on the screen. Our bay wetlands can store almost 50 times as much carbon per acre as a tropical rainforest, for example. So these are areas that it gives a carbon equation that is really beneficial for fighting climate change. Bay wetlands also act as physical buffers that protect us from rising sea levels and damaging waves. So they kind of act like a giant sponge that absorbs a lot of that water that sort of flows in or is getting pushed against the coastline or the bay line. And it does that a lot more effectively than some of the hard coastlines can, where if it's just a solid levee or a solid shore wall or something like that. Baylands also help with freshwater runoff. So if we think about all of the rain and the atmospheric rivers that we've been experiencing this winter, that water is actually slowed down and it's absorbed by these wetland systems or these baylands, which then reduces erosion of the shorelines and erosion of a lot of our stream banks. So all of these actions protect our nearshore communities like Alviso, for example, or East Palo Alto, anywhere that sits right along that bay shoreline. If there's a wetland in between the community and the water, it'll act like a protective buffer. This is especially important in the South San Francisco Bay, where there's been a lot of land subsidence issues from the historic groundwater extraction that's happened there over the years. So those communities in Silicon Valley are already at risk of flooding, even without, these future climate change scenarios. So having wetlands in the South Bay is especially important. Bay wetlands also help with pollution by trapping polluted runoff from adjacent areas. So think about all of the chemical fertilizers and the household wastes and toxic compounds that we accumulate in our developed areas. All of those things flow into our drains and downstream after a heavy rain, like we've been having this winter. And those pollutants are tied to sediments, which then, once they reach the wetlands, if it's a connected system, those sediments get trapped in the wetland. And they're broken down into less harmful substances by just very natural biological processes that are already happening in the wetlands. So they're really helpful to kind of trap and filter out a lot of that polluted material. I'll talk about the wildlife habitat of baylands a little bit further on in the talk. But lastly, baylands also have a really economic and holistic benefits from things like tourism or fishing or hunting or creating recreation opportunities. It's estimated that the annual economic value of California's wetlands is somewhere between $6 and $22 billion. That's billion with a B. So this is not something to think lightly of. There are tremendous economic and holistic benefits here for these spaces. Historically, unfortunately, the South San Francisco Bay was a really rich mosaic of these tidal marshes and these tidal baylands. So you can see that illustrated on the image in the top left side of your screen. Unfortunately, about 90% of that native bayland ecosystem has been lost over the last century. And this is primarily due to habitat development, agriculture, the same sort of story that we see time and time again. But in particular, it was the creation of these salt evaporation ponds. And those are pictured in the bottom right of your screen. All of those polygons, all of those colored shapes, those are individual salt ponds. And so basically, over the last century, sections of marsh were sort of contained by levees. and then filled with water to create the salt production process. And that effectively, destroyed all of that natural tidal marsh and bayland habitat. So obviously this resulted in the loss of really valuable ecosystem services, and a lot of native wildlife became endangered as a result because of that habitat loss. So in the baylands that still exist, we have, remember that we're sitting in a biodiversity hotspot, and our baylands are no exception there. So the San Francisco Bay wetlands support a lot of different aquatic species like topsmelt, arroyo goby, and staghorn sculpin. And all of these fish feed on, abundant invertebrates that are found burrowing in the tidal mud and the tidal marshes. We can also see bat rays that are often seen swimming along the marsh edges. One of my favorite animals is the leopard shark, pictured here on the screen. The South San Francisco Bay in particular is likely the largest estuarine nursery for leopard sharks, possibly in the world. And these guys can also be seen swimming along marsh edges. They're benthic foragers, so they eat crustaceans and bivalves and things that sort of live on the pond or the bay bottom. And so oftentimes during low tide, you can see these leopard sharks swimming up along the marsh edges and feeding. Mammals like meadow mice and salt marsh harvest mice and salt marsh wandering shrews also live in marsh vegetation. They live and breed in those pickleweed tidal marshes. Larger mammals like native gray fox and the non-native red fox also frequent these areas. And our baylands are also home to insects like salt marsh water boatmen, wandering skipper, and a number of other species of beetles and flies. And these insects graze on the leaves and seeds, and they also help pollinate the wetland flowers. So they help sort of support the very diverse plant community as well. So we see a lot of diversity within each trophic level in this ecosystem. As a bird biologist, I feel really fortunate to be in the Bay Area. It's a really exciting area to study and watch and simply just enjoy birds, even if you just enjoy watching them and watching their behavior. The San Francisco Bay provides wetland habitat for almost 1 million water birds every year as they migrate along the Pacific Flyway. And you can see the flyway route in this illustration in the bottom right. This area, our bay, has been designated a Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network because of its status as one of the most important staging and wintering areas along this Pacific Flyway. We also support almost half of the wintering duck populations in the lower Pacific Flyway. And we are also home to 3 important bird areas, which is an official global designation by the Audubon Society, due to the number of rare and endangered bird species that we also have here. So our wetlands in our bay support all of these birds during this very extensive migratory route and pattern. So during migration, we see large flocks of species like western and least sandpipers, dowitchers, marbled godwits, and black skimmers that you can see on the bottom half of the screen. We also have a lot of waterfowl that come through, so scaup and pintail and northern shovelers. You can see them all roosting in their large flock in the top right corner. And so all of these birds depend on the baylands and the mudflats to rest, to forage, and to build up their reserves, to kind of build up their ability to fly back and continue their cross-continental journeys. Our baylands also provide habitat for breeding and resident birds like American avocets, black-necked stilts, and forester's terns. You can see them all represented in the top left of your screen. The breeding ecology of these birds is really fascinating, and they make a very, very cute and charismatic young. The chicks you can see pictured as well. So there are year-round opportunities to enjoy the diversity of birds in our baylands, and I highly recommend that folks take advantage of those opportunities because they're really exciting. So I'm going to focus on 3 specific wildlife species that sort of represent different values of our baylands. The first is the Ridgway's rail, which was previously called the clapper rail. So if you're familiar with the clapper rail, it's the same bird, it's just a different scientific name now. These are medium-sized shorebirds. They forage and breed in these tidal marshes in the San Francisco Bay. Sometimes this bird is called the marsh chicken because it sort of looks and moves like a chicken. It has a long downward curving orange bill, and overall it's got this sort of cinnamon brown coloration with some barring patterns on the sides of the body. Ridgway's rails are pretty secretive. They're a little hard to see because they very secretly move through these sloughs and channels in the tidal marshes, and they feed on the crustaceans and the invertebrates by probing their bill into the tidal marsh and into the mud below. During their nesting season, they actually breed and they nest in the marsh itself. So they create this cup of vegetation that's sort of nestled in the marsh near the upper high tide line. So it doesn't get flooded too frequently, but they do have to adapt to those changing water levels. And unfortunately, because so much of this Bayland habitat has been lost, this species is now both federally and state protected on the endangered species list. So if you ever have an opportunity to look for or see a Ridgway's rail, they're really interesting, and it's also a pretty rare and special occurrence. The second species I want to talk about is the salt marsh harvest mouse. This is also a Bayland tidal marsh dependent species. It's a small nocturnal rodent that forages and also breeds in this pickleweed marsh habitat. The scientific name Erythrodonomys reviventris actually translates directly to groove-toothed mouse with a red belly, because they do indeed have all of those things. They're pretty well adapted to living in marsh habitats and in these Bayland habitats. They can actually swim for up to 2 hours, so they can swim through those changing tidal water levels to get to different areas of the marsh and of the bay. And this species eats seeds and grass and the pickleweed itself, and they also build their nests made of vegetation and place them close to the ground. So a very similar breeding ecology to the Ridgway's rail, even though this is a mammal and that was a bird. It's also got a very similar conservation status, unfortunately, because of all of that habitat loss. This is also an animal that is federally and state protected on the endangered species list. And the last species I want to talk about is a little bit different. This is the western snowy plover, and they're normally found along the Pacific coast of North America. And they're usually found in coastal sandy beaches or river mouths with a lot of small pebbles and rocks. But the plovers that we find in the San Francisco Bay have actually come to rely on a very different or a unique habitat. They actually use the salt evaporation ponds. The same ponds that replaced our natural bay wetlands are actually really important habitats for breeding plovers. So plovers need dry, bare substrate to make their nests, lay their eggs, and raise their chicks, like you can see in the photo here. They forage around those dry, bare areas by running along the surface and pecking at invertebrates on the surface, like brine flies or worms or moths. But because their habitats throughout the rest of the range have also been, developed or changed or fragmented, they're also experiencing really high levels of predation. This species is also federally and state protected and listed. So it kind of creates a very interesting management balance to maintain enough salt ponds in the Bay Area for our plovers, but also, remembering the importance and the value of our baylands and trying to balance those sites as well for species like rails and mice. So luckily, folks in the Bay Area have recognized the extensive loss of baylands and their importance in the fight against climate change. And many projects have been created throughout the estuary to restore these natural habitats back to their original ecosystems and functions. This map shows the location of some of those projects. This is not an extensive list. All of these areas have their own details and complexities, but I just wanted to show you sort of the extent of restoration effort and how much it's been prioritized over the last several decades. So the projects that are most relevant to us in the South Bay are the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, which has a goal of restoring up to 15,000 acres of those salt ponds back into that natural tidal marsh habitat. And the restoration project is focusing in areas in the East Bay at Eden Landing Ecological Reserve, in the South Bay at Alviso, and then also on the peninsula side in areas like Redwood City. The other project that is occurring right now in the South Bay is the South San Francisco Shoreline Levee, which is basically a study that identifies and recommends flood protection and ecosystem restoration projects in the South Bay, and it kind of recognizes those areas to make them eligible for federal funding. So there are a lot of different phases and segments of this project, but they're all sort of moving toward the same goal, which is to restore these baylands and these tidal marshes where they can benefit our communities, and they can help us stay resilient to sea level rise and climate change. And they can also provide habitat back for a lot of our wildlife species that have been influenced. So there's a number of ways that Bayland restoration happens. You can, in the Bay Area, there's the complete and direct conversion of those salt ponds and turning them back into those Bayland tidal marsh habitats. You do this by basically breaking holes in the levees and allowing that tidal water to start moving through again to kind of mimic the natural process. And then those mudflats start accreting, and then we start getting the pickleweed vegetation and the other plant species growing in. And then that's how the tidal marshes grow back. We can also convert those salt ponds to a different kind of pond, which creates habitat for a lot of those different wildlife species, especially the migratory birds coming through, and the plovers as well. So that also helps with bay resiliency. Restoration can include direct species conservation. It can include reconnecting creeks and streams, which have also been really heavily manipulated. So reconnecting those natural waterways helps bring sediment down to the bay from upland sources, which is also really important for building these tidal marshes and mudflats. And then finally, public access and recreation. That's not a direct restoration action, but it's really important because it helps connect different communities to these wonderful areas. It encourages our public to protect and steward these resources. It helps you and I feel a sense of connection and enjoyment with these areas. So public access and recreation is always a component of these restoration initiatives. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about Midpen preserves. Like Natalie said, we own several open space preserves throughout the peninsula, but we have two properties that are situated along the Baylands in the South Bay. The first one is our Ravenswood Open Space Preserve, which is located between University Avenue and Bay Road in East Palo Alto. You can see the map showing the preserve here in the top left. This preserve is entirely tidal marsh habitat. It's about 350 acres in size. It's a wonderful habitat. It's a great quality marsh. There's about 2 miles of bay trail that extends around the north, south, and western edges of the marsh. And you can see the extent of the bay trail on this map here. And we recently completed a project that built the section of bay trail that connects University Avenue to the preserve. And that also includes a boardwalk area that's pictured in the bottom of your screen. So this is an area that I highly recommend folks to come and enjoy, to recreate. It's an area that a lot of folks use to commute to work as well. So you can walk, you can ride your bike, you can come and enjoy wildlife and bird watching opportunities. And one of my favorite things about this preserve is that we have documented presence of both Ridgway's rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse in this marsh, which is really exciting because it just shows that the marsh is acting the way it should be. It's a functional and healthy bayland. And as many as, I think the count was as many as 90 individuals of Ridgway's rail have been detected in this Ravenswood marsh during those population index surveys. So this is just a photo of what the marsh looks like, standing on that western levee, looking out toward the bay and the baylands. And then the image on the right shows the actual locations of all of those Ridgway's rail observations over time. So you can see how distributed they are throughout the marsh. And it's just a really great opportunity to enjoy the wildlife that we've been talking about. And Midpen, I will say myself and Midpen, we're really proud to manage this healthy Bayland habitat for one of the most notable endangered species in the San Francisco Bay. The second property that we own along the Baylands is the Stevens Creek Shoreline Nature Study Area Preserve. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the habitat here, so this area is found kind of on the Shoreline Mountain View, the Sunnyvale Mountain View shoreline segment. It's adjacent to NASA property, and it's also close to Shoreline at Mountain View, so Shoreline Park. And it's also adjacent to the Stevens Creek Levee Trail. It's that dark green polygon in the middle of the screen. The habitat here functions more like an old salt pond where it's sort of contained by levees and it fills with water and dries over time. The Bay Trail here provides opportunities also to recreate, to walk and bike and watch for wildlife year round. So we highly encourage you to come out here and take a look at this fairly unique habitat as well. And what I enjoy most about this site is that our plovers regularly nest on the bare pond bottom here when the water dries out and evaporates. So remember the plovers, they're kind of the unique species that need the salt ponds more so than the actual Bayland habitat, but they're still an important species to keep in mind for balancing that resilience throughout the South Bay. So in the Stevens Creek Shoreline Preserve, it's actually only one of 2 available plover breeding grounds in Santa Clara County. So our 55-acre parcel, which is pretty small, supports about 13% of breeding Bay Area plovers every year. So again, we're very proud to manage another habitat in the Baylands that is supporting a listed species that also needs stewardship and support. Midpen is currently leading a project to enhance this parcel, the Stevens Creek Shoreline parcel. We've already begun the first step of our project, which is to enhance the site for plovers since they're already opportunistically using the site. So we did this by spreading oyster shell material on the pond bottom and also doing what's called a mud stomp, which is exactly what it sounds like, and it's very fun. So these enhancements basically just create a lot of texture on the pond bottom, and it allows plovers to camouflage into their habitat better, which helps increase their chances of surviving and increases their breeding success. So we hope to do more of these enhancements this fall in 2023. And we hope to include volunteers this time. So keep an eye out if this is something you're interested in being involved in. Keep an eye out for that volunteer opportunity on our Midpen webpage or some of our social media postings. We'll be sure to recruit from our community if that's something that you want to be involved in. And the next steps of our project are to basically build infrastructure or build new infrastructure around our property in order to be able to control the water levels and provide different kinds of habitat at different types of year. So this is the kind of restoration where we're not restoring it back to tidal marsh habitat, but we're actually creating a different kind of pond that we can manage very mindfully and support different species at different times of year. And that just helps the overall sort of restoration effort and climate change resiliency effort throughout the Bay Area in sort of in partnership with a lot of those other projects like the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. So Midpen is really excited about this opportunity to contribute to Bayland restoration and also species management in the face of climate change. So let's wind down the talk by talking about how you can help. Baylands are really dynamic and valuable, as we've learned, and they're also home to a lot of sensitive species, and they're sort of a sensitive habitat in themselves. So I always encourage everyone to visit our Midpen preserves and the other shoreline open spaces throughout the South Bay and even into the North Bay. There are a lot of open spaces, a lot of other parks where you can enjoy these baylands. And there are some really simple things that you can do when you're out there to sort of help conserve these spaces. They might sound simple, but they're actually really effective. So walking within the Bayland marshes, to actually walk out onto the tidal marshes can really damage the sensitive plants and the soils in those areas. So always make sure you stay on designated trails. This is sort of a no-brainer for a lot of different habitat types, but it's especially important here. We don't want to be the ones to walk into the nest of a harvest mouse or Ridgway's rail, or we don't want to, scare our wildlife or damage the sensitive plants that occur there. We also know that trash is really harmful to the environment, and the same is true here. But another sort of thing to remember is that trash also attracts predators to these areas, and these are very sensitive areas, especially to wildlife. So if trash is left out, if trash cans are left open, if trash is sort of left on the trails and allowed to kind of blow into the marsh, all of that can attract animals like ravens or feral cats or raccoons, and all of those animals can predate Ridgway's rail, mouse, even plovers. So take your trash with you, make sure nothing accidentally falls out of your back pocket or your backpack, and just be mindful about your impacts when you're out there. As much as we love our pets, and I love my pets too, they can actually frighten wildlife and damage these habitats as well, especially if they're able to wander off the trail. So leave your dog at home, take them to dog-friendly parks in other spaces, and enjoy those spaces with your dogs separately. I also encourage folks to volunteer. There are a number of opportunities to get personally and physically involved with the conservation of these baylands. There are organizations like Save the Bay, the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, even Midpen. We have volunteer opportunities where you can come to these baylands, you can help remove weeds, you can help with habitat enhancement, you can help with doing biological surveys. There are a number of opportunities to get directly involved with conservation and research and general natural resource stewardship. And if we take a step back, we can also think more globally about how we can help. So keep an eye out for ballot initiatives. Think about voting on ballot initiatives that prioritize wetland restoration and climate change resiliency. So consider voting in favor of those things, knowing how valuable these habitats and these ecosystems are. You can support companies or organizations that prioritize Bayland conservation, either directly, financially, or again, through volunteer opportunities. And finally, I always encourage folks to be mindful, to just be climate smart, be mindful of your own actions, how they, contribute to greenhouse gas emissions or climate change or any of these other sort of problems that we know that Baylands can help solve, but everything that we can do to help curb those impacts will be valuable in the future. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. I want to encourage all of you to enjoy these beautiful spaces. They're extremely complex and productive. There are wonderful things to see. And I think the most valuable thing is to connect these areas, to connect our communities with these areas. So the more you go out and enjoy for yourself, the more you can feel that for yourself and feel that for your community, and continue to get involved in ways that matter to you and matter to the ecosystem. So thank you very much. Enjoy. Feel free to, I encourage you to visit our website where we post a lot of volunteer and project information. And if you have any questions or want to know more about any of these projects, you can always reach out to me at my email. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corinne.
Sure.
We have two questions, Corinne, if we have some time. One, I think you just answered, which is what can individuals do to help protect wetlands, which I think your last slide just kind of covered that.
Yeah.
We also have another question of where is the best place for shoreline birding, in your opinion?
There are many places for shoreline birding. I really like the Alviso complex in the South Bay. There's a nature center that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Don Edwards Refuge, manages. And there are a number of salt ponds and open like tidal marsh, baylands, and wetland habitat that you can go explore. There are miles of open trail available to the public for recreation. I would just recommend that you sort of check the tide levels before you go, because that can sometimes influence the number of birds that you're seeing. Low tide, as tide is leaving, that's usually the best time to see shorebirds, because they're eating all those invertebrates and animals that are sort of emerging from the mudflats. So I'd recommend Alviso if you're in that area. But there are so many parks and open spaces. The Lucy Evans Nature Center in Palo Alto is another great location on the peninsula. And there's a really beautiful complex of Baylands and tidal marsh in that Palo Alto Baylands area. So that's another one of my favorites, as well as our Midpen preserves.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure thing.
And actually, next month on April 29th, that Saturday, we have another event in partnership with Midpen and at Ravenswood. So if you all that are watching and tuning in today are super intrigued about seeing Ravenswood and being there, definitely join us. The registration will go up soon on the LatinoOutdoors.org website and on Eventbrite, and we'll promote it all across our social media. But yeah, we'll have a City Nature Challenge inspired nature walk. So we'll have the opportunity to really just take it slow and make observations of all of the nature, animals, birds, plants that we're seeing all around us at Ravenswood. So another tidal marsh, important Baylands area.
Excellent.
Great.
Any other questions coming in? No?
I don't think so. You covered it really well.
Wonderful.
You did.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. And yeah, as Aurora said, we've got a lot more coming up between Midpen and Latino Outdoors, and definitely check out our website, openspace.org, because we'll have everything that we're doing together listed there as well.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.